The top 10 African leaders of all time. Africa's history is like Netflix. You log in, scroll endlessly, and realize there are way too many epic characters to choose from. Seriously, who do you pick as the greatest? The warrior king who could outsmart Napoleon? The president who swapped a limousine for a bicycle? Or the man who spent 27 years in prison only to forgive the people who put him there? Today, we're doing the impossible, ranking the top 10 African leaders of all time. We're counting down from the least influential, though still legendary, to the most influential leader ever to emerge from the continent. Some of these names you'll know, others might surprise you, but each of them left a mark so deep it still shapes Africa and the world today. So grab some popcorn, or jollof rice if you're fancy, because this is history, but with a little flair. Number 10. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Liberia, the Iron Lady of Africa. Picture this. Liberia in 2006 was like a house that had just survived a hurricane. Civil war had ripped the country apart for nearly 14 years, leaving broken institutions, wrecked infrastructure, and a traumatized population. It was a country the world had basically written off. Enter Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Harvard-educated economist, former World Bank official, and the woman who'd prove everyone wrong. Sirleaf became Africa's first democratically elected female president, and right away she showed she wasn't there to play small. She tackled corruption head-on, renegotiated Liberia's massive debt, and brought back foreign investment. Her leadership wasn't about fiery speeches or empty promises. It was about rebuilding trust brick by brick, road by road, school by school. For a country where women had borne the brunt of war, losing families, being displaced, enduring violence, her presidency was symbolic and practical healing. In 2011, she won the Nobel Peace Prize, not just for leading Liberia's recovery, but for proving that African women could and should lead at the highest levels. Sirleaf makes this list not just for her policies, but for the ceiling she shattered. Number 9. Samora Machel, Mozambique, the firebrand freedom fighter. Samora Machel had the kind of presence that made people believe freedom was worth dying for. As the leader of Frelimo, he fought Portugal tooth and nail until Mozambique gained independence in 1975. Becoming Mozambique's first president, Machel was determined to not just be free, but to stay free. He launched literacy campaigns, expanded healthcare, and worked tirelessly to unify a nation fractured by colonial divide and rule. But what made him a continental icon was his refusal to stop at Mozambique's borders. He openly supported liberation struggles in Zimbabwe and South Africa. He understood that independence in one corner of Africa meant little if colonialism and apartheid thrived elsewhere. This boldness made him beloved across South Africa and a target of his enemies. His mysterious death in a plane crash in 1986 near the South African border is still surrounded by conspiracy theories. Machel's firebrand style proved that leadership is not just about ruling your people, it's about standing up for justice everywhere.
8. Patrice Lumumba, Congo, the martyr of independence. Few leaders burn as bright and as briefly as Patrice Lumumba. In 1960, at just 34 years old, Lumumba became the first democratically elected prime minister of the Congo, one of Africa's most resource-rich but brutally exploited countries. Lumumba was fiery, eloquent, and unafraid to speak truth to power. In front of Belgian dignitaries at Congo's independence ceremony, while others delivered polite speeches, Lumumba unleashed a verbal thunderstorm, condemning colonization, forced labor, and humiliation. That speech electrified Africans and horrified Europeans. But his radical stance made him dangerous. Within months, he was overthrown, imprisoned, and eventually assassinated in 1961 with foreign powers complicit in the plot. He became a martyr, an eternal symbol of the price of African freedom. Lumumba didn't rule long enough to transform Congo's future. But his courage in speaking truth to power inspired generations of Pan-Africanists. He proved that sometimes influence isn't measured in years of service, but in how loudly your legacy echoes through time. 7. Haile Selassie, Ethiopia, the Lion of Judah. When Mussolini's Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, most of the world shrugged. After all, colonialism was business as usual. But not for Emperor Haile Selassie. He stood before the League of Nations in Geneva and thundered, "It is us today. It will be you tomorrow." The world ignored him. Then came World War II. He was right. Selassie's defiance turned him into a global symbol of anti-fascism and independence. Beyond that, he modernized Ethiopia, introduced education reforms, and helped found the Organization of African Unity, OAU, today's African Union. At home, though, his legacy is more complicated. While adored internationally, critics accused him of being authoritarian and failing to address poverty and famine. Still, his influence is undeniable. For Rastafarians, Selassie wasn't just a leader, he was divine, the Lion of Judah, their Messiah. Talk about influence that crosses politics, borders, and even religion. 6. Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt, the voice of Arab nationalism. In 1956, Egypt's President Gamal Abdel Nasser pulled a political stunt so bold it made the world stop. He nationalized the Suez Canal, then controlled by Britain and France. Instantly, he became the face of anti-imperialism. The Suez Crisis that followed could have destroyed him, but instead it made him a hero across Africa and the Middle East. Nasser wasn't just about Egypt. He dreamed of Arab unity and socialism, positioning himself as the voice for the global South. Sure, his policies had ups and downs, and Egypt's 1967 defeat in the Six-Day War dented his image. But Nasser's ability to give his people pride, dignity, and a sense of ownership in their destiny cemented him as one of Africa's most influential leaders. His charisma made him larger than life, a leader who could stir crowds with just a few words. 5. Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso, the African Che Guevara. If leadership had a soundtrack, Thomas Sankara's would be punk rock mixed with revolutionary chants. When he took over Burkina Faso in 1983, he didn't just want to lead, he wanted to reinvent what leadership meant. First, he renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. Then he slashed government salaries, including his own, banned luxury cars for officials, and rode around on a bicycle. He planted millions of trees to fight desertification, pushed for women's rights, built schools, and promoted self-reliance. Sankara lived his ideals, and that authenticity made him magnetic. But it also made him enemies. In 1987, at just 37 years old, he was assassinated in a coup. His life was short, but his influence was enormous. Today, he's celebrated not just in Burkina Faso, but across Africa as proof that integrity and radical change are possible, even if dangerous.
4. Julius Nyerere, Tanzania, the teacher president. They called him Mwalimu, teacher, and that title wasn't just ceremonial. Nyerere, Tanzania's first president, approached politics the way a patient teacher approaches a classroom, with clarity, humility, and vision. He believed that independence without unity was meaningless, so he fused Tanganyika and Zanzibar to form Tanzania. His Ujamaa philosophy promoted African socialism, community living, and self-reliance. Economically, it had mixed results, but politically, it built a nation rooted in stability and cohesion. Unlike many leaders, Nyerere didn't cling to power. In 1985, he stepped down voluntarily, a rarity in Africa at the time. His humility and integrity made him one of Africa's most respected elder statesmen. Nyerere proved that leadership wasn't about ego, it was about service. 3. Shaka Zulu, South Africa, the warrior king. Now let's rewind the clock to the early 1800s. While Europe was industrializing, South Africa was experiencing the rise of a military genius, Shaka Zulu. Shaka transformed the Zulu kingdom into a formidable empire by revolutionizing warfare. He replaced long throwing spears with short stabbing ones, introduced rigid military discipline, and developed the famous bullhorn formation. His strategies were so effective that even European generals studied them later. But Shaka wasn't just a warrior, he was a nation builder. He unified scattered clans into a powerful Zulu nation. Of course, his reign was also marked by brutality, and his authoritarian rule sparked resentment. Still, his legacy as one of history's greatest military minds is undeniable. Without Shaka, the story of South Africa would look very different. 2. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana, the Pan-African prophet. If African independence movements had a poster child, it would be Kwame Nkrumah. In 1957, Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African nation to win independence, and Nkrumah, its first president, emerged as a beacon of hope across the continent. For millions of Africans still under colonial rule, Ghana's independence was more than a national milestone. It was proof that freedom was possible. But Nkrumah wasn't just about Ghana. He dreamed bigger. He envisioned a United States of Africa, a continental powerhouse that could rival Europe, America, and Asia. For him, political independence was meaningless without economic independence. And he saw Pan-Africanism as the only shield against neo-colonialism. With fiery determination, he helped found the Organization of African Unity, OAU, and preached Pan-Africanism like it was gospel. His speeches were electrifying, his charisma unmatched. Crowds would gather by the thousands just to hear him speak. And when he declared that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of Africa, he wasn't being poetic, he was issuing a rallying cry. Of course, his bold vision had enemies. Critics accused him of being too radical, too idealistic, and too authoritarian at times. In 1966, while he was on a state visit to China and Vietnam, his government was overthrown in a coup backed by foreign interests. But even exile couldn't silence him. He continued to write, to strategize, to dream of a free and united Africa. Today, Nkrumah's name still stirs pride, debate, and reverence. Streets, monuments, and universities bear his name. His dream of a united Africa may remain unfinished, but his legacy ensures the conversation never dies. He was more than Ghana's founding father. He was Africa's eternal prophet of freedom and unity.
Number 1, Nelson Mandela, South Africa, the global icon of peace. And finally, the number 1 spot goes to Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, a man whose very name has become shorthand for justice, forgiveness, and resilience. Mandela spent 27 long years behind bars for daring to challenge apartheid, a system so cruel it turned basic human rights into a privilege for a select few. Those years weren't spent in comfort. They were spent breaking rocks, enduring isolation, and surviving an existence designed to break his spirit. Yet, when the prison doors finally opened in 1990, Mandela walked out not with bitterness, but with the calm dignity of a man who had already forgiven. The world expected revenge, perhaps even bloodshed. Instead, Mandela chose reconciliation over retaliation. He reached across the aisle to the very people who had oppressed him. showing that leadership at its highest level is not about vengeance, but about vision. In 1994, South Africa held its first truly democratic elections, and Mandela was sworn in as the nation's first black president. That moment wasn't just political, it was spiritual. For millions who had been told all their lives that freedom was impossible, Mandela's victory was proof that impossible could be rewritten. Mandela's genius wasn't just political, it was deeply moral. He taught that true strength doesn't come from crushing your enemies, but from transforming them into partners for peace. His famous act of donning the Springboks rugby jersey, a symbol of white South African pride during the 1995 Rugby World Cup, wasn't just a sports gesture, it was a masterstroke in national healing, uniting a country teetering on the edge of civil war. From Nobel Peace Prizes to statues across continents, from school children reciting his name to Hollywood films retelling his story, Mandela's legacy transcends borders. He wasn't just South Africa's president, he became the world's moral compass, humanity's teacher, and living proof that forgiveness can rebuild nations. So, there you have it, the top 10 African leaders of all time. From warriors with spears to revolutionaries with manifestos, from emperors to humble teachers, Africa has produced leaders whose impact ripples across centuries. What makes them great isn't perfection. Most were flawed, some controversial, but each, in their own way, bent the arc of history toward freedom, unity, and dignity. If you loved this countdown, you know what to do. Smash that like button, subscribe for more epic history deep dives, and share this video with someone who needs to know that Africa's story is the story of resilience, genius, and greatness. Because let's face it, these leaders didn't just change Africa, they changed the world.